Breaking update in the Canada-US power game. Prime Minister Mark Carney has just sent a very clear message to Donald Trump. After Trump raised tariffs on Canadian exports from 25 to 35%, Carney warned that Canadian investment in the United States could fall if this trade fight continues. And when reporters asked about speaking with Trump, Carney simply said, "We'll speak when it makes sense." In this video, we'll break down what Carney really meant, how serious the tariff rift is, what's happening with the USMCA trade deal, and what this could mean for jobs, investment, and the future of Canada-US relations. Let's start with the key facts. According to reporting from Politico, Prime Minister Mark Carney was speaking to reporters in British Columbia when he issued a strong warning. He said that Canadian investment in the United States is already among the highest in the world, but that this could change if trade relations keep deteriorating and a new economic and security pact is not secured. Carney reminded everyone that Canada is the second largest investor in the United States. For a country of about 40 million people, that is a huge amount of capital flowing into the American economy. Then he added a critical line. Speaking about the relationship, Carney said, "Without an agreement, there will be less by definition." In simple terms, he is saying, if there is no stable deal, Canada can and will reduce how much money and investment it sends into the US. These comments came just days after President Donald Trump raised tariffs on Canadian exports from 25 to 35%, escalating trade tensions again. And when it came to talking with Trump directly, Carney did not sound desperate. His words were, "We'll speak when it makes sense." That is not the language of a leader who feels cornered. That is the language of someone who believes Canada has leverage and is willing to wait. So what exactly is the problem with Trump's latest tariff move? A tariff is basically an extra tax on goods crossing the border. When the US raises tariffs on Canadian exports from 25% to 35%, it suddenly becomes more expensive for Canadian companies to sell into the American market. That can hurt Canadian exporters, especially in sectors like softwood lumber and other goods facing duties workers in mills, factories, and transportation linked to cross-border trade, smaller communities that depend heavily on exports to the US. For American buyers, these higher tariffs can also mean higher prices for Canadian products, disruptions in supply if Canadian companies decide to sell elsewhere, or cut back more uncertainty for industries that rely on stable, long-term Canadian supply. Carney's warning connects directly to this. If trade relations keep going in this direction, Canadian businesses may choose to invest more at home or in other countries, instead of putting money into American projects and operations. When the second largest foreign investor in the US even hints that it might pull back, that is a serious signal for Wall Street and for Washington. Carney's comments were not just about numbers. They were also about respect and leverage. He pointed out that Canada has 40 million people, yet has become the second largest investor in the United States. In other words, for its size, Canada puts a massive amount of capital into the US economy. By saying, without an agreement, there will be less by definition, he is quietly reminding Washington, Canada is not a small, helpless partner. The US benefits enormously from Canadian money, jobs, and trade. If the relationship is abused, Canada can reduce its exposure. And when he says, "We'll speak when it makes sense," it suggests that Canada will not jump every time Trump makes a move. Instead, Ottawa will choose the timing and the terms of any serious conversation. For viewers, this is an important shift in tone. Instead of Canada always reacting to US pressure, Carney is publicly showing that Canada is ready to be patient and strategic. Now let's talk about the bigger framework behind all of this, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. According to Politico, Carney told reporters that Trump actually reaffirmed his commitment to the USMCA last week. That agreement gives Canada tariff-free access for about 85% of Canadian exports to the US So on one hand, Trump is raising tariffs on certain Canadian exports, like softwood lumber. On the other hand, he is saying he still supports the wider USMCA framework. Carney also signaled that he is in no rush to start the formal review of the USMCA, which is set for next year. He said the review would begin about 9 months from now. This is another sign of strategy. By not rushing, Canada keeps its options open. It can watch how the tariffs and the political situation develop. It can coordinate with Mexico on a common approach. It can build public support at home for whatever stance it will take in the review. In fact, Canada's Trade Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, told Politico that he already spoke with his Mexican counterpart about starting renewal talks as early as this fall. So while tariffs are rising and tensions are growing, Canada is quietly working with Mexico, building a united position for when the USMCA review begins. It's also important to remember where Carney made these comments. He was in British Columbia to announce $1.2 billion Canadian dollars in support for Canada's softwood lumber industry. And he specifically talked about helping the industry pivot to doing more business within Canada in response to the rising duties imposed by the United States. What does that mean? Canada knows that U.S. duties are hurting its lumber exports instead of just begging for lower tariffs. Ottawa is putting serious money on the table. The goal is to help Canadian companies sell more within Canada and diversify their markets. This fits perfectly with Carney's larger message. If the U.S. keeps raising duties, Canada will adjust. It can shift trade inside its own borders, look to other partners, and reduce its dependence on a market that keeps adding new barriers for the softwood lumber industry. This $1.2 billion support is not just a band-aid. It is a signal that the federal government is willing to invest heavily to keep the sector alive and competitive, even if the tariffs stay high. While Carney was in British Columbia, other senior Canadian ministers were busy abroad. According to the report, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand and Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne were in Mexico for a series of meetings that are to include Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. Their mission lay the groundwork for a future meeting in Mexico between Carney and the Mexican leader. This shows that Canada is not dealing with Trump and the U.S. alone. It is working closely with Mexico to coordinate on the USMCA review, to discuss trade strategy, and to make sure that both Canada and Mexico are prepared if the U.S. pushes hard for changes. In simple words, while one part of the Canadian government is openly warning Trump about investment and tariffs, another part is quietly building alliances and planning the next moves. From the American side, these developments should not be ignored. If Trump's higher tariffs push Canada to reduce its investment in the U.S. and pivot its industries, like softwood lumber, away from American buyers, then the U.S. can lose capital from one of its largest foreign investors, a reliable supply of key materials, such as lumber that feeds the housing sector. Political goodwill from a close neighbor and ally. Carney is not shouting or threatening, but by talking about investment levels, by backing the USMCA only on Canada's terms, and by supporting domestic industry, he is quietly reminding Washington. Canada has tools of its own. Canada is willing to use them, and Canada does not have to accept every tariff without reacting. For people living in Canada, what are the practical consequences? First, for workers in export-focused sectors like softwood lumber, the immediate impact of higher U.S. duties is negative. It's harder to sell into the U.S. market at a profit. But the $1.2 billion support plan shows that Ottawa is trying to keep mills running and jobs protected by opening up more domestic opportunities. Second, for Canadian businesses that invest in the United States, Carney's warning suggests a possible shift. Companies might reevaluate new investments in American plants or projects, choose to invest more inside Canada or in other countries. Wait and see how the trade and security pact talks evolve. Third, For the broader economy, this situation is a test of Canada's ability to diversify. If the country can reduce its exposure to unpredictable tariffs while still growing, it will come out stronger and more independent. For immigrants and new Canadians, especially those working in construction, manufacturing, or trade-related services, the message is mixed. There are risks if exports to the US slow down, but there may also be new opportunities in Canadian-focused production and in sectors that receive government support. Where can this all go from here? Scenario 1. Trump and Carney eventually speak, as Carney said, when it makes sense. Tensions cool down slightly, some tariff issues are managed, and the USMCA review moves ahead with strong Canadian and Mexican input. Scenario 2. Tariffs stay high or even increase. Canada doubles down on its domestic pivot and its partnership with Mexico. Investment in the US slows and the relationship becomes more transactional and less friendly. Scenario 3. The dispute over tariffs becomes part of a wider argument over the USMCA, security, and North American strategy. Negotiations become more complex, and businesses on both sides of the border face a longer period of uncertainty. Right now, Carney's words suggest that Canada is patient but firm. It will not rush, it will not panic, and it is ready to act if there is no stable agreement. Before we close, an important note. This video is based on reporting from Politico about Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent comments on tariffs, investment, and the USMCA. It is meant for information and analysis only. It is not financial advice, not legal advice, and not an official government statement. Trade rules, tariffs, and political decisions can change quickly. Always check the latest updates from official government sources and trusted news outlets. If you want more clear breakdowns of Canada-US relations, trade news, and what all of this means for workers and families in Canada, make sure to subscribe. Like this video, share it with anyone who follows Canada-US politics, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Thanks for watching and stay informed.